I'm so crazy, but we're just going green. People think we're so crazy, but we're just going green. People think that we're so crazy, we're just going green. People think that we're so crazy, we're just going green.
And indeed, people do think that I'm crazy, but we are just going green. This is Nick Anthony, this is the Going Green Show, and we are on show number 46. I hope you have enjoyed the beaches before the storm came through this afternoon. And this evening, do enjoy the show. We're talking about the art of happiness and the Dalai Lama, looking at different ways that he has found to be happy without being pleasurable and destroying the planet. We'll also be discussing this week's paper, looking at things such as the flooding in Patong, where they have a new solution with some pumps. We'll be looking at the Vegetarian Festival coming up from the 15th, and also an update on the protected area investigations that have been ongoing here in Phuket. International news, we'll be talking about the dolphin slaughter in Japan. This week was a good week. It was a blue week. There was no slaughter, which is fantastic news. We'll be reviewing two conferences that took place in the US, one called the State of the Planet and the other by the Smithsonian Institute called the Anthropocene Conference, which is a symposium on the age of man. That is the time that we're currently in. And I'll be also looking at some new news out of Europe, particularly on Norwegian subsidization of fuels, which is being reduced, and indeed on the same line talking about Bhutan, which is moving to a good position of being 100% organic by 2020. So there is some positive news also on tonight's show. Firstly, let's take a quick look at a review of what are the drivers of extinction. And of course, all of these are the result of human behavior. The first is habitat loss through deforestation, something that is now being combated here on Phuket and indeed across Thailand. Invasive species, not so much of an issue on Phuket, but indeed a problem around the world. Pollution, a big problem here in Thailand, but a problem that's getting under control. Climate change, of which on Phuket we are seeing more flooding, heavier rainfall by being in the tropics, and also we're seeing the first effects of increasing water levels with beach erosion. And the last three, which are the drivers of extinction, the over-exploitation of resources, human overpopulation, and consumerization. Okay, let's look at something a bit more positive to start, and that is the art of happiness. Question being, will it revolutionize our planet? The Dalai Lama, over the last few decades, has consistently extolled the virtues of humanity and the underlying compassionate nature of human beings, a view that is slowly gaining ground here in the West. In 1998, Howard Cutler wrote the book The Art of Happiness, and with the Dalai Lama helps to extol the compassionate virtues of mankind and how we can come together to solve problems. The notion that human behavior is essentially egoistic, that fundamentally we're all out for ourselves, is deeply ingrained in Western thought. The idea that we are not inherently selfish, but hostile and aggressive has dominated our culture for centuries. Power, money, control, religion, all good reasons that individuals felt were there for persecution, short-term thinking, natural resource pillage, and an attitude of me, me, me. When I come back from the back and break, we're going to talk more about the Dalai Lama and look at how he, with a more compassionate view, believes that there is in fact an instinct of sympathy to our species, and in fact a better humanity can prevail as we do come together. And indeed, welcome back to the Going Green Show. This is show number 46. We're talking about the art of happiness and the 1998 book that was written by the same name about the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, of course, is a compassionate man and has been extolling the virtues of compassion around the planet in a way that we can come together to solve problems. There have been others before the Dalai Lama with a more compassionate view. David Hume in the 1700s wrote about natural benevolence in humans, and a century later, Even Charles Darwin himself attributed an instinct of sympathy to our species. However, generally, a more pessimistic view of humanity has prevailed. Thomas Hobbes, who was a philosopher in the 17th century, saw our race as a violent, competitive, conflict-orientated, self-interested, and generally held a pretty dark view. In the earlier 20th century, Spanish-born George Santayana, another philosopher, wrote that generous, caring impulses, while they may exist, are generally weak, fleeting, and unstable in human nature. But dig a little beneath the surface, and you'll find a ferocious, persistent, profoundly selfish man. Freud claimed that the inclination to aggression is an original, self-subsisting, instinctual disposition, whilst writers Robert Ardrey and Konrad Lorenz looked at patterns of animal behavior in certain predators and concluded that humans were basically predators as well, with an instinctive drive to fight over territory. In recent years, the tide appears to be turning. Contemporary researchers have refuted not only the idea of humanity's innate aggression, but also its egoistic behavior. Humans, it turns out, do have an altruistic, basic instinct. The tendency to closely bond with others, acting for the welfare of others, including other species that we share the planet with, is possible. All humans have the seed of compassion, which, with consideration and open mind, can be supported and indeed can flourish. Once we conclude that the basic nature of humanity is compassionate rather than aggressive, our relationship to the world around us changes immediately. Seeing others as compassionate instead of hostile and selfish helps us relax, trust, live at ease, and indeed, it makes us happier. When we come back from the break, I'll talk about the source of happiness and indeed the ills of pleasure. You're listening to Nick Anthony, and this is The Going Green Show. Stay tuned. This is In Excess, by my side. And welcome back to The Going Green Show. This is show number 46, and I've been talking about the Dalai Lama and indeed the art of happiness, and looking at, in fact, how we can come together to make the world a better place. Well, the source of happiness, and of course the ills of pleasure. Humans are quite adept at confusing happiness and pleasure. The Dalai Lama suggests two ways to be happy without the destructive pleasure. The first is inner contentment. And it's really not about how much we can get, the houses, the cars, the cash, as there always will be a cap. Always will be a limit. And for every man to live an American lifestyle with its 3 cars and its two houses, etc., would require around 3 planet Earths just with our existing population. It's not possible. Inner contentment comes from appreciating what we have, something that Buddhism is very good at teaching, and indeed here in Thailand, something that people understand and indeed are content and are happy. Sabai Sabai. The second, the Dalai Lama suggests, is the source of happiness is your inner worth. To be happy, there must be another sense of worth than purely economic. To be good, to do good, to be honest, compassionate, and caring. Do those, and it will ensure that through good times or bad, in sickness or in health, you will enjoy the support of friends and family. Your inner worth has a higher value than the economic benefits of chasing purely economic returns. And lastly, he suggests spirituality, not to be confused with religion, but it's the key to training the mind. Asking the question, will such and such that I'm about to do make me happy or provide pleasure? Nurture the basic human qualities of goodness, kindness, compassion, and caring. Value your inner worth, and by doing that, you will have inner contentment. This is the art of happiness. Without a planet and without sustainable life, there indeed is no pleasure and certainly no happiness. Over the last 48 hours, there have been two major conferences in the US. One is the State of the Planet. You can take a look at the website, stateoftheplanet.org, that looked at building a global agenda for sustainability. And there was also on Thursday the Smithsonian Institute's Anthropocene Symposium. The Anthropocene is the age of man. And it also brought together a great number of people that looked at, in fact, the brightest minds in the planet that have looked at combating climate change, raising awareness about the critical issues we face, why energy prices should not be subsidized, and how, as a species, we can come together, like the Dalai Lama says, in spiritual harmony, finding happiness in compassion, not in possessions, and why collectively there is urgency. Also worth noting is the upcoming Plus Rio 20 conference in Geneva, also about the Anthropocene, that will be discussing many of the same things. This week in the US was also another important, I won't say conference, it was a debate by, of course, the vice presidents who duked it out with no reference to climate change. Here in 2012, the American grain belts are severely droughted. Wildfires dance through parched lands. And in fact, the US is now 66% under drought conditions. The Arctic ice has melted to record lows. Sea temperatures have shown dramatic rises. Yet the American consumer machine shows scant concern for the long-term benefits of a healthy planet, and instead focuses on short-term gains and feeding its machine, feeding its debts, and its righteous beliefs that was well put in the State of the Planet address by Mr. James Hansen from the NASA Institute, who stated that the only liberty that fossil fuel kingpins care about is liberty to make as much money as possible. Until the biggest countries on the planet reverse the basic ideology of their community's basic ethos, many other things feel like moving deck chairs on the Titanic. As a believer in the art of happiness and the fundamental compassion of humanity, I feel the current global momentum for a better planet will avert a crisis, but only just, and with perhaps unchangeable ramification for the delays since the 1980s in changing the Earth's destructive direction. One country that also believes in this principle is Bhutan, which is well known for its happiness index over economics. And when we come back after the break, I'll tell you what they've been doing. And they are, in fact, a role model for countries and would be a wonderful role model for our own country here in Thailand. This is Nick Anthony, and you're on the Going Green Show.
Nick Anthony, caring about your island home. This is Going Green on Live 89.5.
Tonight I've been talking about the Dalai Lama and the Art of Happiness, a book that was written in 1998. And one country that believes in this principle is Bhutan. It's well known for its happiness index over economics, preferring to emphasize environmental protection and its citizens' mental well-being. It banned TV until 1999, keeps out mass tourism, and recently set up pedestrian Tuesdays, banning cars from town centers. Its agricultural minister recently said that its decision to go for a green economy was in light of the tremendous pressure we are exerting on the planet. This determination can be seen in its plan to phase out artificial chemicals in farming over the next 10 years, making its staples of wheat, potatoes, fruits and vegetables 100% organic by 2022. The only other place that is running for this accolade and way of life is the tiny, self-governing island of Niue in the South Pacific. With only 1,200 residents versus Bhutan's 700,000, they aim to reach 100% organic by 2020. Well, the global organic market today is worth around 44 billion euros. By going organic, Bhutan assures quality, attracts higher product prices, and attracts superior buyers. Okay, moving on to the next segment for tonight, this afternoon, I should say. Let's take a look at a trailer by one of my favorite actors, Jeremy Irons, in a new movie called Trashed. Take a listen.
From up here, our planet looks perfect. It's only when we look more closely that we start to see some of the results of our consumption. Does anyone know what happens to it all?
This is not just a local problem.
Somehow in the deep ocean, we've got more trash than life.
We produce too much waste. We don't think about the consequences when we throw stuff away.
It seems to be a case of out of sight, out of mind.
Nature functions by building up and breaking down, building up and breaking down. We keep putting things into the environment that don't break down.
Everyone in the population today has these chemicals in their bodies.
It's everywhere.
It causes all sorts of diseases.
A woman has a way of getting rid of it. It's called having a baby.
Talking about BPA. Question, can we change it?
We did it with smoking, the smoking ban. We did it with seatbelts and wearing seatbelts. We did it with drink driving, actually, when that became unacceptable. We need to do this with waste.
Perhaps times will change and we will.
It's a new movie coming out called Trashed by Jeremy Irons, and I hope we can try to get it here in Phuket. And well worth taking a look on YouTube, or you can go to myseek.org, and the link to tonight's radio show is on it. And I've loaded up the YouTube video on that page. There's another burning down the house type situation going on. That is overfishing. It's happening all over the world. Currently, 2/3 of the world's fishing fleet are in fact based here in Asia. And I'm firstly going to talk about overfishing on the western side of Africa. And then in about 15 minutes, I'll play a clip about, in fact, overfishing here in Asia by VOA. This first clip I'm going to play is another movie review about illegal fishing. It's about pirate fishing exposed in West Africa, and indeed how the fish are finding their way to the EU through, of course, illegal measures. Take a listen.
Illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, or pirate fishing, is a grave threat to the marine environment, its biodiversity, and the livelihoods and food security dependent on it. Losses due to pirate fishing are estimated to be between 10 and 23.5 billion US dollars per year, representing between 11 and 26 million tons of fish. West African waters are estimated to have the highest levels of pirate fishing in the world. Fish is a crucial source of protein for millions of people, and fishing is one of the few sources of employment in many coastal communities. During a dramatic 2-year investigation, the Environmental Justice Foundation, EJF, has documented rampant pirate fishing in Sierra Leone and the laundering of this illegal catch into the world's major seafood markets. Many of these vessels are quite literally out of control, fishing in protected areas, destroying local fishermen's nets, hiding their names, transshipping their catch illegally at sea, evading arrest, attacking local fishermen, and abusing their own crews. The catches of these vessels have been entering the EU, the world's largest import market for seafood. This is despite a new EU regulation which requires all fish imported into Europe to be accompanied by a catch certificate that declares that the catches have been obtained legally. 90% of the vessels documented by EJF fishing illegally are bottom trawlers, vessels that drag heavy trawl equipment along the seabed, catching all marine life in their path. Up to 75% of the catch of these vessels is dumped back into the sea, dead or dying. EJF has been working with local communities in Sierra Leone to combat this illicit trade in stolen fish. A community surveillance boat responds to calls from fishermen who witness pirate fishing or have their fishing equipment destroyed by industrial trawlers operating illegally in inshore areas. Local staff in Sierra Leone take photos, video and GPS positions of offending vessels and submit evidence to the Sierra Leone government and European authorities to ensure that the vessels are sanctioned and their catch cannot be exported. The information is also sent to the vessel's flag state, who under international law is responsible for monitoring its activities. This monitoring in remote coastal areas of Sierra Leone, supported by EJF's team of investigators, is having important results. Fish has been seized at European ports. The Sierra Leone government has fined 2 pirate vessels over $300,000. Panama has fined one of its boats $200,000 for receiving illegal fish at sea. And Korea is in the process of taking action against 14 vessels documented by EJF. The EU is also considering the possible blacklisting of the fishing boats identified during this investigation. All known illegal trawlers are believed to have now left Sierra Leone, and artisanal fishing communities in Sierra Leone and northern Liberia are reporting an increased ability to fish due to the reduction in pirate fishing. But the problem persists in other areas of West Africa. In Guinea, a number of vessels that fled Sierra Leone have been sighted fishing in inshore areas. One of them, the Myong 2, has changed its identity to avoid detection and sanctions for its previous crimes. EJF is now calling for urgent action to find a global solution to the continuing high level of pirate fishing in West Africa before it's too late. Developing coastal countries must be supported in controlling their waters and protecting their marine resources. Flag states must be forced to control their distant water fishing fleets, and a global record of fishing vessels must be developed, which gives each fishing vessel a unique identification number that cannot be changed. Ports, seafood companies and consumers must say no to pirate fish before it's too late. Sign up to our petition online. Visit www.ejfoundation.org.
Indeed, excellent new movie there called Pirate Fishing Exposed, talking about fishing in West Africa and its impact on the EU markets. And those comments that they had about overfishing, bottom net dragging, polluted waters, and indeed massive overfishing and reduction in species is happening here in Asia. And when I came back after playing some Supertramp, we'll look at a new article this week from VOA talking about declining fish stocks here in Asia. This is Nick Anthony here on the Going Green Show.
Nick Anthony, caring about your island home. This is Going Green on Live 89.5.
Supertramp there with a dreamer. Indeed, we all have to have a dream, just as Martin Luther said, I have a dream. And indeed, here on Phuket, our dream is for a sustainable future, for a sustainable island, for clean beaches, for clean waters, and for protection of our marine species. One of the big problems that we're now facing is indeed our marine environment. Our land is getting cleaner, our roadsides are being swept. The amount of trash that's going into the oceans, at least from our local communities, is, I believe, this year reduced by as much as 50%. And there's a great deal of public awareness locally about all of us doing manageable small things that collectively will have a big impact on the island. However, the ocean, which is a massive amount of our planet, currently has only around 4% of it as protected areas. 96% of the ocean is free for people to go and pillage and rape and destroy and kill our species. As you just heard, in West Africa, particularly in places like Sierra Leone, overfishing has been a massive problem from pirate fisheries. Perhaps they're Chinese or Korean, or maybe they're coming from other parts of Africa, but they're fishing illegally in their waters. And there's a group there who've been very successful at driving them out of Sierra Leone and indeed are trying hard to push them out of the entire West African coast. The impact being that now fish stocks are recovering quite quickly. Well, here in Asia we have our own issues. On any given night on Phuket, you can see as many as 3,000 fishing boats off the west coast. which if you consider there are supposedly only 7,000 fishing boats registered in Thailand, half the fishing fleet is in this small area. Of course, we also get fleets coming down from Burma, and we also have Indonesian fleets in these waters. So we do have a massive fishing fleet in our own Andaman Sea on the fringe of the Indian Ocean, and we have problems. One is massive amount of pollution that comes off the boats. When we did our beach clean 2 weeks ago, at least we think 60, maybe 70% of the trash that was on the beaches was coming from boats, floats, Red Bull bottles, nets, ropes, all that type of thing. There was very little plastic household trash. There was very little shampoo bottles and regular sort of toothbrushes and that sort of stuff, which tends to get washed down through the drains and pushed into the oceans. But it was indeed mostly fishing fleet trash. So one of the challenges that lies ahead for Phuket in 2013 is to get hold of that tiger's tail and start to tame the Thai fishing fleet and introduce sustainable fishing measures. We have been with the NGO SEEK and the BOB LME, which is the Bay of Bengal Large Marine Environment, an NGO that's based here in Phuket that looks after actually the whole Bay of Bengal, including Thailand, Burma, Bangladesh and all around India. And they have been working on fishing fleet sustainability, particularly on the catch side, and we've been discussing with them sustainable waste management policies, which we can introduce at the same time. I'm going to play now a video that was put out this week on VOA about overfishing here in Asia, echoing many of the things we just heard about Sierra Leone.
In the southern Philippines fishing town Sindangan is a scene becoming more common across Asia, with soaring fish prices and falling wild fish catches. This fisherman says more fishing boats are depleting the region's once healthy fish stocks. Across the South China Sea, nearshore fish catches have declined since the 1980s, pushing fishermen to go offshore with bigger boats. As the catches fall, United Nations fisheries official Benjamin Francisco says fishermen desperately search for tactics to boost their haul.
Some of them has some degree of destructive impacts. The use of fine mesh nets, the use of dynamite, explosives for fishing, and other fishing gears that are considered harmful, those that catch juveniles or those that harvest maturing spawning stocks.
Such tactics degrade some species' ability to regenerate. To tackle the problem, Francisco has been promoting a licensing system to regulate the number of boats on the water. Asia's fishing fleets are still the world's largest, accounting for nearly 3 million of the world's 4 million fishing vessels. And by most accounts, those numbers are increasing. In Hong Kong, there are bigger efforts at regulating fleets, banning trawling near the shore and spending more than $200 million to boost catches by small fishermen. So Ping Man of the Hong Kong Agriculture, Fisheries and Conservation Department is optimistic about their impact.
The catch value per unit effort will increase almost doubled in 25 years' time.
Hong Kong's measures are costly and out of reach for other countries in Asia.
The issues are deeply rooted in poverty, in the inability of local governments to respond immediately, insufficiency of funds.
Sindangan town's fish warden Julie Buot says most of the fishermen here use fine mesh nets, gear that has been banned for years because it catches very young fish. Wilfredo Ortega feeds a family of 9 children from small-scale fishing. As monsoon winds begin to hammer the seas, a last-ditch fishing excursion earlier in the day resulted in a catch worth only $50.
In these months, it's quite tight. We can only save money during the months of November, December, and January by catching young sardines.
The young sardines may sustain Ortega's family now, but the catches today mean fewer mature fish tomorrow, an even riskier future for those who depend on fishing as a last resort. For producer Pros Laput in Hong Kong, Heather Barron for VOA News.
And there you have it. That was VOA talking about overfishing in Asia. Okay, let's take a look at some international news for this last week, of which there's been quite a bit. Fortunately, in Japan, we track on a daily basis the Sea Shepherd, who are a group that have been based up in Taiji now for the last 3 years, or down in Taiji in the southwest of Japan on the coast. And the small port of Taiji is, of course, where they catch and slay dolphins. This last week, they are in, as they call it, fishing season. However, there was no dolphins caught, and as a result, no dolphins slaughtered in the cove, which they use for dolphin meat, even though it's poisonous. And more importantly, they actually catch live dolphins, and they provide most of the dolphin trade around the planet for aquariums. I noticed this week in the Philippines, there was actually a new law passed that school children are now not allowed by law to visit with their schools dolphinariums. So an effort there for Philippines, a very brave one, to try to stamp out the dolphin trade, and a recognition that in fact aquariums are bad for dolphins and whales, and that dolphins and whales should be let free and should stay free. Also this week in Taiji, the team had their a day in custody. They were all arrested for the day and interrogated, and all of their cameras, computers were confiscated in a sign that the Japanese government is stepping up pressure on the Cove Guardians. Perhaps one reason for that is that the Sea Shepherd recently exposed allocations of fund allocations from the tsunami relief efforts to fight the anti-whaling campaign from the Sea Shepherd. Positively this week, the story was picked up by a big newspaper, the Asahi Shimbun, and it is becoming another of Tokyo's political scandals. Let's hope in Japan that brings greater awareness to what's being done in Taiji, and an effort to try to stop not just Japanese whaling, which is supposedly for scientific purposes, but also stop the killing of dolphins and whales in Taiji. Governments need to spend $80 billion a year to halt the extinction of endangered animals and plants. Many times current levels, and only half the amount paid to bankers in bonuses last year, a new study has showed. The extra spending is vital to protect natural services, such as insect pollination of crops or water purification by wetlands. It was in yesterday's edition of the Science magazine. They stated that these are investments in natural capital. They are not bills. They are dwarfed by the benefits we get back from nature. The report is trying to put a price tag on UN goals for 2020 agreed by governments in 2010 for preserving everything from insects to whales. They estimated that it would cost $76.1 billion to expand and manage protected areas for endangered species. It would cost an extra $3 to $4 billion a year to achieve a goal of avoiding extinctions and improving the conservation level of all known threatened species, ranging from the giant panda to the tiger, or perhaps to lesser known frogs or plants. Many scientists say the sum now spent on biodiversity protection is about 10 times too little. The $80 billion is about half of the $156 billion estimated in one report as bonuses at major banks in 2011. Now that's also a fraction of world defense spending of $1.7 trillion, and $40 billion is only 1 month of QE3, which is the quantitative easing which was announced last month in the US to buy back mortgage bonds. The study said that the sum was equivalent to 1 to 4% of the net value of ecosystem services, ranging from seed dispersal to waste decomposition by insects that are lost every year. Those losses caused by destruction of the habitats are estimated at costing between $2 to $6 trillion a year, according to scientists in the UK, US, Denmark, Australia, Germany, and New Zealand. So there we are. UN goals for 2020 include expanding protected areas to 17% of the world's land surface, which is currently only 12.7% protected, and for the seas, from a current 4% protection to 10% protection. The scientists started off by estimating the costs of reducing threats to endangered birds, the best studied group of animals, and extrapolated the results to other species. That article, thank you to Reuters. Norway, a very important article this week, has said that it will double its carbon tax on its North Sea oil industry and set up £1 billion fund to help combat the damaging impacts of climate change in the developing world. This is one of the most radical climate programs yet by an oil-producing nation. The Norwegian government has proposed increasing its carbon tax on offshore oil companies by £21 to £45 per tonne of CO2, and a £5.5, that is British pounds, per tonne CO2 tax also on its fishing industry. Norway will also plough an extra £1 billion into its funds for climate change mitigation, renewable energy, food security in developing countries, and conversion to low-carbon energy sources. It will step up spending on new projects to combat deforestation in developing countries, taking up its spending overall on forestry programs to over £300 million a year. Previous forestry projects have involved Brazil, Indonesia, and Ethiopia. In Indonesia and in Brazil, actually Norway last month held back its funding so that the targets would indeed be met by both of those countries. The government in Oslo will also spend £70 million buying carbon credits in 2013 to help offset its emissions, force through new building regulations to make all new homes carbon neutral by 2015, and increase efforts to heavily cut emissions from cars switching to electric vehicles. The scale of these initiatives will pose a significant political challenge to other oil-producing nations who are also investing in low-carbon technologies and cutting their own emissions, but not yet investing heavily in tackling the impacts of climate change on developing countries. Take, for example, the US. Also, speaking of the US, there's been a trade skirmish this week over solar panels, which has pitted the US against China, and indeed pitted one wing of the American solar industry against another. It's also pitted one presidential candidate against the other. Well, and you thought tariffs were boring. Well, the Commerce Department issued its final ruling this last Wednesday in a long simmering trade dispute with China, imposing tariffs ranging from about 34% to nearly 47% on most manufacturers of solar panels and cells imported from China. For most of the Chinese manufacturers, the penalties are somewhat higher than those announced by the Obama administration earlier this year, when the government determined that Chinese companies were benefiting from unfair government subsidies and were selling their products below the cost of production, a practice known as dumping. Wholesale prices for solar panels have declined by nearly 75% since 2008, as Chinese companies expanded capacity and production much faster than the growth in worldwide demand. About a dozen panel makers in the US, as well as similar number in Europe, have gone bankrupt or closed factories since the start of last year. Think Solyndra. Well, while the US paneling manufacturers suffered from cheap Chinese imports, US panel installers think Chinese imports are just dandy. A group called CASE, which is the Coalition for Affordable Solar Energy, was formed to oppose the trade petition. CASE members include fast-growing Bay Area startups like SolarCity, Sunrun, and Sungevity that install solar panels, including panels made in China. President Obama will likely use the decision to back up assertions that he has been tough on China. GOP White House challenger Mitt Romney argues Obama has not done enough to combat Chinese trade practices. But Obama has upped pressure on China in recent weeks, first by imposing tariffs on tires imported from China, and then by blocking a Chinese firm from buying a U.S. wind farm. That's something we talked about the last couple of weeks in Oregon. So there we are. That's good news. Good news if you're a U.S. solar manufacturer. However, I think the guys out of San Francisco are pretty much right on the button. Actually, having cheaper products is going to force people like the U.S. to get off their energy bandwagon and to reduce their reliance on oil. Okay, before we break for a minute, I'll talk about an article and a video that was in the Guardian newspaper yesterday. Actually, a very good article and a very good video that summarized a discussion that took place that is based around the premise that we have only now 50 months to avoid climate disaster. This is 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, they had a conference which said that effectively we have 100 months to avoid climate disaster. And now that we're at the halfway point to this climate gamble, The Guardian commented on the takeover of democracy by big business, and indeed what's at stake. One or other of us will have to go, said Oscar Wilde, who is supposed to have said on his deathbed to his hated wallpaper. Well, the perilous acceleration of Arctic ice loss and the imminent threat of irreversible climate change poses a similar ultimatum to the economic system that is pushing us over the brink. For society's sake, I hope this time we redecorate. On Monday, it marks the halfway point in a 100-month countdown to a game of climate roulette. On a very conservative estimate, 50 months from now, the dice becomes loaded against us in terms of keeping under a 2-degree centigrade temperature rise. This level matters because it is an environmental domino effect, and it's likely to operate in a volatile and unpredictable dynamic. Things like melting ice and the release of carbon from the planet's surface are set to feed off each other, accelerating and reinforcing the warming effect. The time frame follows an estimate of risk of rising greenhouse gases from the world's leading authority on climate change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, called IPCC. They say that it's already past a certain point, and it will no longer be likely that we stay to the right side of the line. Some consider even a 2-degree rise too much, but it is a limit that the EU and others have signed up to. Extraordinarily, however, in spite of the stakes, the issue has receded from the political front line like a wave shrinking down a beach. This could, though, merely be a prelude to it returning with a vengeance. Politicians may have turned their backs, but others have not. This is Nick Anthony, and you're on the Going Green Show.
Nick Anthony, caring about your island home. This is Going Green on Live 89.5.
I've just been talking here about the Guardian article and looking at a very tight timeline that, in fact, we only have, on a very conservative estimate, 50 months from now to keep temperatures globally under a 2-degree temperature rise. And the call is for all governments, such as we just saw from people like Norway, to act in a strong manner and to be leaders. Whether it was rebuilding Europe after the Second World War or action to protect the ozone layer, we do know that it's possible to put aside narrow self-interest, and leadership like that will go down in history. What we do in the next 50 months is not a choice between what we have done in the past and what we are doing today. It's an invitation to embark on the most extraordinary, exhilarating, and challenging adventure our society has yet faced. Learning how to thrive without disastrously destabilizing the climate on which we depend. Every step matters, and it matters most that we start walking. Well, I do have some good news, and of course here on the island we have started walking. The last 3 years have seen an incredible change on the ideas of sustainability, the feeling towards the future, and the efforts from local communities, not just private citizens, but local orbitors and indeed the local government. And SEEK, which is a local NGO, has been working closely with the government to try to introduce sustainability. And before we wrap for this evening, I'm just going to take a look briefly at today's newspaper from the Phuket News with respect to the compass indicators, and that is looking at N for nature, E for economy, S for society, and W for well-being. And it's interesting every week to review the newspaper articles in reference to these issues. In Nature, this week's edition talks about flooding, and the mayor of Patong, Pian Kisen, will invest 5 million baht, or about $200,000 putting in a couple of pumps, which will alleviate flooding in the area. On page 4, there's an article about protected areas and the ongoing investigations into the Sirinath National Park. The last Wednesday, training started with 366 investigative teams, and there was a report on October the 9th, 4 days ago, to a parliamentary commission on progress of these Phuket investigations. Damrong, the demolisher, who is the head of the national parks, has now retired last weekend, and the new deputy director met with 15 MPs in Bangkok from the Land, Environment and Natural Resource Commission to give them an update on Phuket's investigations. And lastly, in local news, coming up starting on the 15th, on Monday, is of course the Phuket Vegetarian Festival. It will be running till the 23rd, and shrines have been stocking up on veggies, causing very heavy vegetable inflation, a big issue locally for the next what will be 8 days. The Jutui shrine, for example, in Phuket town, has stocked up with 400 kilos snow peas, 620 kilos of bok choy, 1 ton of tofu, 2 tons of Chinese noodles, and 10,000 sacks of rice. The 125 cooks will be providing food for 10 days. And the good news with the Vegetarian Festival is that the hotel occupancy in the lead up to high season is already 85 to 90%. So, what are we going to do? We're going to do some things locally. First is to be aware. I do thank you for listening to the Going Green Show and staying tuned. We welcome you to come on the show. Anybody has an opinion, anybody would like to say something, you're welcome to call in. Indeed, if you'd like to come on the show, call ahead of time and come and join us and join the debate. Second is to be involved in action. Reflect, think about your actions, reduce your waste, reduce energy use, reuse what you can, including composting, and recycle as much of what's left as possible. Be responsible to Phuket, and be responsible to our planet. And lastly, find your voice. Retweet, tell others, join Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at Indigo Nick, or you can find us on Facebook at Seek or the Kamala Green Club. And of course, you can find all that information at myseek.org. So, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Tomorrow, I'll start with this evening, coming out after our show, there is the Best of Breakfast with Sam and Natasha. It's a great rundown from their week's shows. Then Steve and Sarah have dance anthems this evening from 7 till 10 p.m. There is Saturday Night Fever from 10 p.m. until midnight. And then in the morning tomorrow, Jay Lashak will be back on with his weekend brunch from 10 till 1. Tim Newton on with The Spin, Sunday afternoons 1 till 4 p.m. Mr. Jason Weiler is on from 4 p.m. till 7 with the International Chart Show. He'll be producing the Top 40. And in the evening, you have the Sunday Night Chill, very cool music from 7 till 10 p.m. That's it for me. We're out of time. Enjoy your Saturday evening. Enjoy your day tomorrow. Do get on the beach, and please pick up any plastic, pick up any trash, and do your bit for a clean Phuket.